So I've talked out the ass on all of our other YouTube videos, so I'm gonna try and make this like 10 minutes long today. Warming up, something overhead, something extra on a rotation. Joey lives in internal rotations, so we're gonna get him on a high cable curl. We're gonna go Avenger Row, we're gonna go single arm dumbbell row, pull down, some rear delt stuff, some bicep stuff. Nothing crazy, but we'll try and keep it short, quick, give you a quick rundown on everything.
Simplistic, not a lot of skill emphasis today on our exercises just because a lot of them we can get into some pretty easy positions and push output, so less focus on trying to master a skill today in some of our reps and sets, which means a lot more intensity, getting really juicy. So today's, I love back days like this where we just get to rep and just work. So what, you like my capri pants?
I didn't know if we were wearing the same ones.
No, these
They're
are
matching, it's kind of cute.
Nike Yogas.
White shoes, those are Nike. A1 today is gonna be this Avenger Row right here. We're gonna go with a lat bias. Usually for lat work, I like to go single arm, but we're gonna go single arm next with our dumbbell row. There's not a single arm lat machine over here that we love. That's not too easily loadable, and the cable stack over there is too easy to max out on. But had the dumbbell row in for like 2 months now, 10 weeks, something like that. We kind of capped out where the max dumbbell is 150 and it's getting too easy. So what we're gonna do is move that from the A1 spot to the B1 spot. We're gonna move this in as the A1, almost like a pre-exhaust. This is still gonna be heavy output, but it's gonna make that 150 on the dumbbell rows a little bit harder. So instead of going 12, 15 reps, we're gonna do this first, then we're gonna drop reps on that because we're gonna be more tired by that point. Machine, we can go upper back or we can go lat focus. Difference will be in the arm path. So we've had this in as an upper back movement. Now we're moving it to a lat movement. So for upper back, we're trying to get full retraction, protraction. We're really focusing on moving our shoulder blades. For more of a lat focus, we're gonna change our execution a little bit. We're gonna go a little bit of a lower grip. We're gonna go more elbow to the hip. We're gonna stop here. So we're not getting into hyperextension. We're just extending shoulder to the hip. Not worried about retraction, protraction. Worry more about movement as a lat. Upper back focus. Lots of scap movement. We're gonna go a little lower with the hands, driving the elbows down to the hip. One more thing on this, I mentioned it a second ago. For lats, usually I prefer to go single arm. It's a little bit easier to adjust to our shoulder width so we can get a more neutral arm path. So you see Joey on this, it's a little bit tight for him. Jim's kind of busy right now machine-wise. This was the best option to start with. We can load it. It's not perfect from a lat standpoint, but it's pretty good. I think the load here will kind of make up for the lack of adjustability.
Yeah, so something too with back exercises that I feel like it's been just kind of an issue within strength and conditioning. If we just sit in this retracted state and just pull, we're not getting like full movement of the lat. And so we're just really like limiting the development of the lat. Make sure we're getting into like full ranges of motion when we're doing a lot of these movements and not just sitting in this kind of like bastardized position that ends up just like you're jerking off the weight, I feel like.
It's funny because the whole S&C fixation is on like 2 pulls for 1 push or whatever it is. But if you're executing your back movements like this is no different than a press. That's like the issue with the press is that we're like stuck in this scap and down position and we're not getting movement of the scaps. So it's like, okay, we're pressing, training all these anterior muscles, we need to train posterior muscles. But the issue is that we're doing all of our back exercises and we're stuck here. Like we're getting shoulder extension, but we're not moving our scaps at all. We're not getting any protraction or any upward rotation. So what Joey's saying is like a lot of guys will do all their rows, stuck in this kind of retracted position, and then it's all just like shoulder extension. We're not actually checking like shoulder health because we're not getting any movement at the scaps. So we make sure we're keeping a neutral T-spine instead of being stuck here or instead of flexing, extending. Neutral spine, let the scaps move. We're getting protraction, retraction, shoulder flexion, shoulder extension. Pair that with something overhead, we get full upward rotation. Like that's gonna check shoulder health. That's more important than just doing blanket 2 pull for 1 push. Like let's actually break it apart and see like what shoulder health means and then take care of that versus coming up with some stupid ass ratio without actually looking at the nuance. Doing this stuck in an extended like retracted position is no different than doing a press, like for shoulder health. It's the same issue.
And so instead of doing like Jordan kind of coined this phrase of like don't do like corrective exercises, just do exercises correctly.
Yeah.
And you'll have like the function. The exercise is not a bad exercise, or doing 2 for every 1 is not like a good way of programming to like combat your problems on the other side. They're trying to fix all the stuff that you've already had a problem with, but you're not fixing it by just adding 1 more back exercise for every press. Like that's not going to fix anything. But doing the exercises correctly, you can if you do them right, you're gonna end up fixing a lot more stuff. So you're not gonna fix that through programming. You're gonna fix that through exercise, like cueing and doing the exercise correctly.
It's almost the same as a lot of your leg day stuff. Like we were doing a lot of the same movements, even like in preseason when you hurt your back doing deadlifts.
Yeah, it wasn't the deadlift. It was the fact that I was in a externally rotated position. I was pushing through my heels, so that's what hurt my back. It's not the deadlift. And you said this a couple of days ago. It's like there's certain people that coaches have a problem with certain exercises, not because the exercise is bad, but they've had like some type of negative effect from it. Like they hurt themselves. They've had an athlete that they've had that hurt themselves, and so they just throw the exercise out. And it's like, we're never doing this again. But it's like, that's not the exercise's fault, that you either didn't know what you were doing with it, or like when you were training yourself, you didn't know how to like cue yourself. You were doing the exercise incorrectly. So if you do the exercise correctly, that's gonna have a place in your programming, but don't just throw out an entire exercise that actually has like a lot of benefits for the athlete or yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like there's exercises that like for certain people probably aren't great. Like I'm not gonna have Taco Fall do a low bar back squat.
Yeah.
But like there's exercises too that people kind of stray away from because they've had issues with injuries in the past or issues with like whatever with it. And instead of unpacking the reason why they suck at it, the reason why it caused the issue, they just kind of scrap it.
Yeah.
But really if you look a layer deep, you can see, oh, okay, like you were just bad at internal rotation and like actually using your glutes. So you're blowing out your SI joint.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that, fix it, and then give you some more movement variability.
But the idea was, oh, let's strengthen your glutes by doing like glute band walks and hip bridges and all that stuff. Like, if you look at me, you're gonna be like, okay, an area that he's really strong at is hip extension. Like, he's good at it when he's kicking. You got a bigger butt. Like you can see people that are good at hip extension because they have the muscles are bigger in that area. So for you to come around and say like, oh, his core is weak or his glutes are weak, like they're not weak, they're strong. It's just you're not using them correctly while you're doing the exercise, or you're not doing the exercise correctly. So therefore, they're not being used how they're supposed to be. So
it's like the whole thing we were saying is like your glutes weren't weak. It's like they're concentric.
Yeah.
And if a muscle's concentric, then it can't shorten even more.
Yeah.
Like if you're already shortened, you can't shorten, so you can't really do the action we're supposed to do. Instead of your glutes, it's like your hamstrings, adductors are doing everything. B1, we're going single arm dumbbell row. I already mentioned earlier, this was our A1. Moving it back a little bit because the dumbbells are getting a little bit too easy in that spot. So talk about here in a second with it being more challenging the rotation versus challenging just the shoulder extension. But this was like our main skill movement. We progressed it more into output, and now we're moving it down in order just to make it a little bit harder. So it's not really like a pre-exhaust, it's kind of just like basic like load management or understanding that like whatever's in the A1 spot would take the most of our resources. So we're the most fresh, we put the most into it. When that gets too easy, we'll move it back in order, put something else there so that we can make it like subjectively harder, even with the same objective load.
if you are someone that's a little bit more of a novice lifter, go ahead and keep this as that like first exercise. Trying to learn skill, trying to figure out how to dissociate the upper body and lower body while moving. So all those things are going to want you to put this as kind of the beginning exercise, but again, we're a little more experienced. It helps us to back it down a little bit. Real easy cue too, especially when Nick's going. You see him almost just like putting the dumbbell in his pocket. It's going to fit his arm path. So when you're doing these, if you start rolling up to the shoulder, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the shoulder. So go ahead and take it to the pocket. Now, we also don't want to get too much into this sweeping motion. You want a little bit of like elbow flexion when you're doing it. Don't just kind of fly the weight away from yourself. It is lat extension, or it is shoulder extension, so you are hitting the lat primarily, but I feel like the total movement we're trying to get is a little bit of flexion of the arm as well as shoulder extension.
It's also like very meatheady.
Yeah.
Like that's like, we just did sagittal lats. Like the goal here is to be more like rotational.
Yeah.
So we want to get into that transverse plane. We don't want to be like all sagittal.
Yeah.
So you look at lats, same with like contralateral versus ipsilateral. Like if we were to do a machine row, we'd go same arm, same leg, because we're trying to just get shoulder extension. We want the counterforce to be matching the straight sagittal shoulder extension versus here, we're going contralateral. We're allowing more rotation, so it's gonna be more challenging to rotation versus being challenging just the shoulder extension with the lat. So lats, we can train output, the straight shoulder extension, or we can train skill here, which we were actually training still for output because we got pretty good at it, but we're training more like function of the lat, more rotation of the lat. So Joey's kind of asked me to ask about the cue with the offhand. It's right here. Pushing hard into the rack. We're trying to get a more horizontal counterforce. So with this, there's like a vertical component to the movement and a horizontal component. We're gonna get a good counterforce with our leg right here driving down. We're gonna add one with our offhand pushing away. So that way we can get a more close angled vector with the direction of the load. basically just creating more stability for output.
So if you watch some of our other videos, or if you're just watching this one, a lot of the stuff we do, we're doing like single sets of exercises. So we're not supersetting these with a lot of things.
Oh God.
The reason for the supersets, if you're pressed for time, supersets have their place. But if you got 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half to spare in the gym, go ahead and separate your sets out. So you're focused on one exercise, you're pushing high intensity on one exercise. You're not bouncing back and forth between different things. Some points, again, if you're stressed for time, go ahead and superset them, but.
Keywords though.
Huh?
If you're stretched for time, that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's a time constraint. If you have a time constraint, superset. If you don't, then like there's no, I think people think it's like this magical like anabolic switch that's turned on when you superset things, but it's really doing the opposite. Like the moment that you start doing an exercise, you're pouring out of this neurological bucket, right? So like as we do reps, we're fatiguing our nervous system. So if we could go and do 8 reps here, 8 reps here, even like single arm shit, like you really, if you're going high output, you could rest between sides. You won't really notice a big difference until you get into higher rep ranges, but still, it kind of exemplifies that like if I'm doing a set of 12 with this 150, and I switch arms, and I might only be able to get 10, it's because like the moment I start that first rep, I'm pouring out of this neurological bucket. So like if we did rows and superset it with the press, our output on the press is always gonna be lower. Even if it's an opposing muscle group, we're still pouring out like neurological fatigue, right? So we in an ideal world, we don't have neurological fatigue going into the next exercise, next set, etc. Same reason why we're gonna rest for like 3 minutes in between sets. Supersets, if you have a time constraint, sure, do them. Like that's probably the best option is a superset if you need to do that. If you don't have time constraints, there's no like magical reason to do them or no magical benefit from doing supersets. C1, lat pull-down, supinated grip. Really checking the boxes, getting overhead. So we talked about over on the Avenger Row, like saying 2 pull for 2 or 2 pull for 1 push isn't necessarily like 1 for 1, or it's not going to be like a good way of looking at it. Instead, let's look at the fact that like when we press, we're stuck in this retracted position most of the time. When we row, we can do the same thing. So instead of thinking like 1 row equals 1 row, let's look at the shoulder. So we want protraction, retraction, and then we want to get some upper rotation. So right here, really getting overhead, getting full upper rotation of our scap. And then we're gonna do low row next, right? We're gonna get some retraction. So instead of thinking like, oh, just like 2 back exercises for every push, we don't really need this like set equation. And we see, look at, okay, like we're getting pinned down here, make sure we're moving still. So let's go protraction, retraction, upper rotation, checking those boxes. So a pretty good rule of thumb is get overhead, any push day, any pull day. Get something over here, whether it is a push or a pull, let's make sure you're checking that box of getting upper rotation, getting full shoulder flexion. All right, D1, going this low row, upper back focus, so we're trying to really get our traps going here. Kind of went like lats, even lats overhead. We got that component of getting upper rotation of the scap. Now we're just making sure we get some retraction, protraction. So approaching our back day from the standpoint of like hitting our lats how we can, hitting our upper back however we can, and then also making sure we're checking the box of like getting all those planes in motion.
A lot of shit and it's just going through.
Right.
There you go.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Stay tall. 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 Shrug it out. 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 Shrug. 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 Our traps probably do better having a retraction component too. So usually we think like dumbbell shrugs. That's just an elevation of the scaps. With this, we can get a little bit of elevation, plus we can get retraction. So probably gonna get the most out of our traps if we can get into a plane like that where we get some vertical integration and some retraction as well, versus just going straight meathead shrugs. To join the debate of whether traps or whether shrugs train your traps or not. E1, one dumbbell hammer curls. You can do these seated or standing. Later in the workout, I like the stability of the bench. If you're like somebody who's a more novice or intermediate lifter, it's probably good to have a little bit more external stability when you're doing your curls, just so you're not swinging around. Going neutral grip will be a little bit more brachialis versus biceps. Probably doesn't make a huge difference. Like when we train elbow flexion, like we're still training our biceps and our brachialis regardless of whether we're in a supinated grip or a neutral grip. Adding the lean in, it's not gonna really be more like stimulating per se for our biceps, but it's probably be a little bit more better for our elbows if we can get our shoulder, elbow, hand in the line. So looking at carrying angle. You see mine, like looking over in the mirror, you can see like my shoulder, elbow, and a hand, like carrying angle is pretty significant. So for me especially, I'm leaning, making sure I get that all in a line, just so my elbows don't get cranky on me. Wrapping it up, 4 pulls, 1 curl, what do we start with? Avenger Row, move that to A1 to pre-exhaust our single arm dumbbell row. Not in the conventional sense of like pre-exhausting any special benefit, but more so just to make the dumbbell row subjectively harder. Dumbbell row second, we went lat pull down to get overhead, and then we went on the low row to get some more scapular retraction, get our traps going, mid-thoracic. Finishing up with some curls, hammer curls, something that's loadable. Don't undersell the effective load on a growing muscle. There's a lot of cute bicep variations going around right now, so load it first. I said it'd be quick, maybe it wasn't quick, we'll see. That's it, Irish goodbye.